Yeah, hello, welcome to a new video. This is the third video in the e4, e5 repertoire series for black. And this video will deal with two openings or two lines mostly that white can play and that often transpose into each other, so it's handled in one video. This is the Vienna game. So on the second move, knight c3, and also the bishop's opening, bishop c4. As I mentioned, these often transpose into one another. So let's begin with the bishop's opening, bishop c4, as this has very little value on its own, so to say, as it usually transposes into something else. Usually the Vienna, but could also easily transpose into the Italian. Okay, bishop c4. The move I suggest here is knight to f6, immediately attacking the e4 pawn. And now white has two options really to cover this pawn, and this is knight to c3 and d3, of course. Mostly played here is by far d3 to cover the pawn. What's also possible here is, of course, knight c3, which transposes to the Vienna directly. Usually white starts knight c3, knight f6, bishop c4, so we got the same position. This will be handled in the Vienna, so somewhat later in the video. On d3, my suggested move is bishop c5, and after that usually white goes knight c3, and we again transpose into the Vienna, starting with knight c3 on the second move. White, of course, also has got knight f3 here, attacking e5, and this can be most simply met by knight c6, and we transpose into the Italian game. This will be handled in a separate video later. Usually, of course, this is reached by, on the second move, knight f3, knight c6, and then bishop c4. So this is full of transpositions. What white also can do, he can ignore the threat on the e4 pawn and play moves like d4 here, or knight f3, and these can be handled in various ways, by transposing to something, or to play some standalone line. Here, for instance, black could go knight c6, transposing into the two knights of the Italian, but this is not part of our main proposed repertoire. But you can also just take this pawn and see what white is up to. Usually he answers knight c3 here, and tries to play in Gambit style. You have various options here to handle this. The main line here is sort of funny. Maybe it's good for black, but I never bothered to really check this. Main line here is taking and then protecting the e5 pawn with a somewhat ugly looking move f6. According to theory, this is very good for black, but I never bothered to check it, to be honest. And I usually just handle these kind of lines by taking here and then continue developing with bishop e7, for instance. And I never had any particular problems here. So just returning e5. So you can very often handle these kind of Gambit approaches by common sense play. Also, you can, if everything else fails, you can also simply drop this knight back here and you've got no problems. Just continue with development. He cannot get into any crazy attacks here on f7, and if he captures, you can just win a tempo here and then continue with your development. So very often if white goes with some gambit approach, you can just yeah, be not too greedy and think about your development. Don't take every pawn that is offered to you. Another option here is to play d4 as a gambit. This black can answer with taking, and now white continues with knight f3. Oops, knight f3. It is not good here to play e5, because black has the typical response d5. This is something or a motive you really need to get used to here in the open games. If you get some sort of position where this bishop is on c4 and white advances, it is in more than 90%, I guess, of the cases, d5 is the right answer. It is, well, in this position, black doesn't have any alternative move, really. You cannot really consider it going back to g8 here. But also in other positions, d5 is usually the correct answer, winning this tempo on the bishop. Here white doesn't have anything else than give the check here. Stuff like this here is just brilliant for black. He has complete central control and even an extra pawn, so it's complete joke actually for white. So he needs to check here, and then you can simply play this move, gain another tempo, and then white needs to go for a somewhat weird looking position with taking here, or move the bishop again, after which you can simply move the knight to e4 if you like. So it's not too dangerous. Knight f3 though is something you need to consider. Here it is very risky to take the pawn. This gives white, oops, of course not, queen d4. Queen d4 gives white a very nice compensation for the pawn. He will continue to develop very rapidly. But black has a very good alternative here in giving the check. And this pretty much gives black decent play. Move like this here can simply be answered by taking, and now grabbing on e4. This position is somewhat similar to the one before, but the bishops here, f8 and c1, are not on the board anymore, and this helps perhaps black a lot, because an issue was bishop g5 with the bishop still on the board. Here black has no problems at all. You can just continue with normal development. Even c6 can be considered, something like this here, to block off the bishop. And here black is almost simply pawn up with not too much of compensation. What white also can do is he can play c3 here, then you just take here, takes, and now an important move to remember is d5. Well, important to remember is very relative, because this line is super rare. I never got it, but well, you need to cover it in a video like that. d5. This helps a lot to speed up development. White takes here, and then you just drop the bishop back, and black just has a fine position. You can easily develop your pieces here, and this pawn configuration d5 and c3 is not too great for white, as it gives black a nice square here on c5, probably for the knight later, and this bishop is looking somewhat silly at the moment. Black has no problems at all. If he gives this check, you can simply exchange queens and have a really good endgame. These pawn weaknesses and square weaknesses are just a nice target. So this is not too dangerous. Note that this can also turn up from d4 on the second move. you take bishop c4 and knight f6. Okay, well, everything else here just transposes into the Vienna, just like this, as mentioned before. Let's turn to the Vienna move order now. Knight c3, knight f6, bishop c4. Of course, there are alternatives. I'll look at this later in the video. And now black has really a multitude of options. What I don't recommend here, my main move is this. What I don't recommend here is to take, because this has more than one problem actually. It is playable, but one issue here is the move queen h5. Knight takes e4 would be no problem at all because of d5. Just to show this. Knight e4, d5, and black wins back the piece here with a nice position. Let's say something like this, and black just enjoys this slight advantage here in the center. But okay, this is not the problem here, because the problem is this really direct threat here on f7. And now black doesn't have anything else than this move here, and this can either lead to some weird complications after bishop b3 or queen e5 with a very equal position. It's not something I'd like to recommend. You can play it, but I thought what I'm proposing is more interesting. As mentioned, this is bishop c5. An alternative, which is of course very decent, is knight c6 here. Just to show it briefly, white usually replies d3, and then you have the choice between knight a5, grabbing the bishop, or bishop b4 with a very healthy development. This actually was my main alternative. I wasn't sure what to show, this setup or bishop c5. At the end I decided for bishop c5 because it is not so well known, but also continues some nice points. I'll show this later. d3, or later I'll show this now. d3 here, and now it's a very important turning point. The normal looking move here would be knight c6, and it's playable, no doubt about that. But what I don't like about this is that white can go f4 here, and then d6, knight f3, and we transpose into, yeah, the king's gambit declined. This position usually would arise in a different move order. So let's show this quickly. This can also arise in this move order, by the king's gambit. But of course, in the king's gambit move order, black has a multitude of other possibilities. d5, as I showed, but also the accepted ton of other lines. And to be honest, all these lines are, I think, more promising and interesting than the declined variation. So what white is often doing in the Vienna move order, this move order, is to try to sort of trick black into the king's gambit declined. And of course we don't oblige here and play something else. My proposal here is the move c6. This is somewhat rarer move, but it's very interesting. The idea is mostly to prepare d7, d5 to attack the bishop on c4 immediately, and to get counterplay in the center should white try f4. I think the best move here for white, maybe, or the most solid move here, is knight f3. But of course f4 is critical here. Let's start with f4. Here you have a very nice and interesting choice. You can go for a very solid setup, or for a multitude of very sharp options. The solid move, which can be played basically without knowing any concrete lines, is d6 here. This has been played by some strong players already. The idea is knight f3, b5, bishop b3, and then knight b to d7. This kind of setup. This is in a way similar to this declined Queen's Gambit, King's Gambit, it's called King's Gambit, that I showed before. But in the King's Gambit declined, black has the knight on c6 and didn't have those queenside pawn moves in. So there is a difference, and the difference is that these pawns here nicely cover the central squares. White doesn't have a control over the d5 square, and also with this b5 move it is pretty much secured that this bishop stays on c5. In the King's Gambit declined with the knight on c6, white often has the chance to play knight a4 and exchange the bishop, and this bishop of course is black's most important piece because it prevents white from castling kingside. This is very solid for black and can be easily played if you don't feel comfortable in the sharp lines that I'm showing next, or if you just want to have a normal maneuvering game with all pieces on the board. This is of course a very fighting position and can be played easily. So, but now to the sharp stuff. What black can do also after f4, which is very interesting, are two moves. One really sharp and the other is both are sharp. Let's start with e takes f4. This is the first option. White then recaptures on f4 usually. This is mostly my own analysis, so there's not so much in games available. So if you intend to play this, it's a good idea to set this up yourself on a board and maybe check this with the computer and go through some lines to get an idea what this is about. White can also go e5, and as mentioned, the response to this should be, I screwed something up here. It should be d5. Just it's very similar in all these lines. On e5, d5 to attack the bishop, and here white doesn't have much choice. He needs to capture the knight. Everything else is just terrible. Let's say the bishop retreats here, then black can even go knight g4, threatening queen h4, and it's getting really ugly for white. This bishop is also looking really stupid against these pawns, so he needs to take here. And now black has a choice between two sharp options. I like queen takes f4, f6 most here. You could also take here and get a really messy position, but I think it's easily playable for black. You've got two bishops, and the king is not especially safe on white side. Black can go for a long castle in the long run. Very complicated position, but queen f6 I like even more. The thing is, it's not really a piece sacrifice because knight h4, queen h4 is threatened here, so white cannot rescue the bishop. This is just a direct win. It's either mate or a huge material loss. It's just f2 here, the problem. So white usually goes for, or should go for something like this. And then you have the cool move king d8. Now the bishop on c4 is still hanging, and rook e8 is also threatened, winning the queen. So white needs to go for something like takes here. Takes on d5, queen f3, rook e8 check, knight here, and then the game continues. And it's a really messy position. If you intend to play this, it's a good idea to maybe check this before, somewhat invest some time and have a closer look at this. I cannot really go for 20 move deep lines here. I'm just suggesting that this is an interesting way to play, but you need to look at this for yourself a bit. White, of course, usually just would recapture here. This is a normal move. And then black castles. Here, black will get good play with the help of d5 next move. And this basically happens against everything that white might play here. For instance, e5, d5 is very nice for black. Or an alternative could be a move like d4, after which you pin here, e5, you've also d5, bishop moves, and knight e4. So this position I actually would prefer black by far already. I think this this c6 setup is a nice weapon against this white intended plan to play a late f4. So white is trying for some sort of improved king's gambit, and you shouldn't really allow this. Another interesting possibility here, instead of taking, is the direct move d5, and this can get completely crazy. White takes on d5. This looks logical in my book. He could also take on e5, after which you capture the bishop and get a position like this. And here I also would hugely prefer black already. Black has two super strong bishops and can quickly castle long. Knight d7, long castle. Okay, you lose a pawn temporarily after d takes c4, but who cares? With such great piece play, it's absolutely no problem. Black is very nice here. The main issue here is e takes d5. After this, black has a cool option in knight g4, just directly attacking here on f2. And this is I analyzed this briefly with the computer, and it gives this as somewhere between equal and slightly better for black, but it's completely crazy stuff. Just one sample line could be d6. The idea is on queen d6 to play a knight e4. Knight f2, of course, is a threat, and it's executed. Queen h5, attacking on f7, mate. So castles, knight e4. So c5 is hanging, and this might continue. Knight takes, d takes, queen b6, threatening bishop, queen b4, winning the bishop, and also g1. So this is necessary. Queen b4 check, knight d2, bishop e3, and this is really a crazy position. So what it comes down to, this is just one or two lines that I want to show to give you an impression about the sharpness of the position. So this setup with c6, and then going for a quick d5 after f4 is really an interesting way to steer things up as black. Of course, white has less aggressive alternatives. He can go knight f3, after which you just play d6 and cover the e5 pawn. Black usually develops in a fashion like the following. Let's show this briefly. Castles, bishop to b6. It's a good idea to always have the c7 square ready in case white plays knight a4. And now white will continue developing here. Let's say rook e1 or something. Castles, h3, knight d7, bishop somewhere, and then one decent plan that black can go for is move the rook and knight to f8 to g6. You could also retreat to c7, play b5, so it's a very flexible position, and black has no problems in developing all his pieces to good squares. A similar picture arises after a move like bishop g5 here. Black can take this tempo and then continue as mentioned, knight to f8, let's say d4, knight g6, winning a tempo here, and then castles. And black has a nice position, two good knights here who nicely control those squares here in the center, and on the fourth rank the bishop is also actively placed. You can go rook e8 to play against e4. This should be around equal. So I think this is a nice way to play with here bishop c5 and c6. So what alternatives are there? Here white has some other moves in the Vienna, and this is mostly the move f4. This is a very old line. It dates back to the 19th century, but it's still played pretty frequently on an amateur level. It's actually hard to understand why, because black has a very easy game if he knows just one or two lines. I think the main point why this is played still so often is because sometimes a less theoretically expert player might take on f4, and then e5 is very nice for white because black's knight doesn't have any square, so he needs to retreat them. So taking is just bad. What you need to do is just the logical move d5. Always strike in the center against those f4 attempts. And now white takes on e5 in, I don't know, 99% of the time. While preparing this, I actually saw that there are a couple of games with e takes d5. I wasn't really aware that this is possible. Black here has two good options: just to take, which I recommend, or you can also take here, which leads to a similar position to the King's Gambit, which I showed earlier. But you can just take here. White's somewhat crazy idea is to take now on e5. Something like this, of course, is no problem. You have no issue here with the queen developed early. When the knight on b1 is not existent anymore because it has been exchanged against the g8 knight, then you have no problem with the queen here, as it cannot be attacked. Black is, I think, already at least equal here. I would prefer black, because f4 is just a silly move in such a position. Okay, f takes e5 is the idea. Just grabbing this pawn. And the fun thing is, here white needs to play king e2, and this looks completely crazy at first sight, but it has some trick behind it. And okay, this has actually been played by Nakamura in a tournament game against Alexander Onyshuk. He's also close to 2,700 players, so Naka obviously believes that this is playable, and it's playable. I don't object to this. It's just looking a bit crazy. The only thing here which you need to remember is that queen e4 is not such a good idea. It looks nice, but the problem is white plays king f2. If you want to get your pawn back, white goes knight f3 and gains lots of tempi on the queen. And white is really quick with development here. He's got possibly a bishop b5 check coming up if you retreat the queen from the 5th rank, and rook e1 and d4. And white has some nice active chances here. So queen e4 is not so great, but you can just develop. It's really paramount in open position. Develop your pieces quickly and don't care so much about a pawn temporarily. We can see this here. Black has so much pressure here on e5, and he will castle long, that white wants to get the queens off with queen e1, queen h5, and now in this Nakamura game he played king t1, so white has made some strange swapping of queen and king early. But I think what Onyshuk played is just sufficient. He took on e5. It's a nice pin here on the h5 e1 diagonal, and it continued like this. Rook e8, and black gets his piece back with a roughly equal position. Okay, this line is so rare, I doubt that you will ever get it, but it's nice to have seen it once, that you don't go for this queen e4. This is a little trap. Queen e4 is quite nice for white, so just don't do that. Just continue with quick development. Okay, but the main move by far after d5 is of course taking on e5, after which captures on e4 with a knight. And here white has two moves really that are played most often. One is, and this is also one of those cases where you need to know one line exactly, d3. What you need to know here is you shouldn't be tempted by the check on h4. This is a little trap that white has set. This check is not good for black because g3, knight takes, knight f3 is a problem. Black needs to go queen to h5 to keep the spin on the rook alive, and then white can capture on d5. And this is somewhat crazy, of course. Black could take on h1, after which white would take on c7 and a8. Don't want to get into detail, but this is a very good variation for white. So don't fall into this trap. You can just take on c3, takes here, and then you need to remember the key move here, d4. This is very important. If black would allow white to play d3, d4, then white might have some chances to play for an advantage. You need to play d4 yourself, and so sort of isolate this pawn here. This pawn doesn't have a cover now by some other pawn, and it will be difficult for white to really to hold the center. Let's say knight f3. White already offers a pawn here after taking on c3 to play d4. Black shouldn't take it, just develop. And now usually bishop e2 here, bishop c5, castles, and now you can finally take this pawn and just continue with your development. Black is a pawn up here, and white has some wake compensation, but I think all in all black is just fine here. An alternative for white would be to, in this position, to take on d4, after which you flick in this check. This is also a nice move to throw in, bishop d2, taking, and take on d4. And black is just great here. e5 is just a weak pawn, and white needs to be careful not to have this whole position completely shredded. It's full of holes already. So mostly it continues with c3 here, takes, and now I think black has more than one good move, but one that I like is queen d5, attacking e5, let's say this, and bishop f5. Black is just fine here. He's got the perfect pawn configuration. No pawn moved. This is of course the ideal way to set up your pawns because it has no weaknesses, while white has done a ton of pawn moves and the position is full of holes. So black should have no problems here at all. It's just a question if it's what is this, slight advantage, clear advantage, is it equal? Well, I would say black is somewhat more comfortable, at least. So this is d3, but white can also go knight f3 here. After this I would recommend bishop c5, directly hitting the f2 square, after which white usually plays d4. A somewhat weird alternative is queen e2, after which you can just give this check, king d1. White's idea is to win some time now, because those advanced pieces of course need to move again. So black just takes, and then retreats his piece here, bc, bishop c5, let's say d4, returns, queen f2. Alright, I had a slight problem here with my recording software. I hope it just continues now. Okay, we were here, white playing bishop to d3, and now just c5. And black has a nice position, because white's king is not especially great on d1, and he still has some pawn weaknesses. White has no real attacking chances here, so no problem really. White could also take here, after which you need to retreat your bishop and just continue here with short castle and get on with development. White will always have issues with this king. He doesn't have any decent square, or needs to lose lots of time to repair this king position. So queen e2 is not really threatening. d4 is much more common, after which bishop b4 just pins the knight. Bishop d2 is I guess the only move, and now just c5, attack the center immediately. Black is already, I think, at least equal here. Possible lines could be let's say a3. You can just take here and continue development. You have lots of nice pieces, no problems at all with getting your pieces out. And of course e4 is just a fantastic knight, which really annoys white, I guess. A direct attempt by white to get rid of the knight can be played, of course, here. You can just recapture. Here white needs to take on b4. He cannot play something like this. We can just he can just capture the knight because of the pin. Takes here, takes, and now the knight doesn't have any decent square and needs to return. Already this opening cannot be considered a success, of course. Let's say castles, bishop c4, knight c6, c3, takes, and now just to show a sample continuation, queen c7, threatening discoveries with the knight, bishop b3, and then black even can sack a piece here, just to show this. Black here has three pawns for the piece, and just a great position. White has an uncastled king, because it has moved already. It cannot castle anymore. The knight is still on g1, so black has a clear advantage. Of course, this is here on move 18. It's just a sample line to show that there's not much to fear. Really, the Vienna with f4, 3f4 is just completely harmless, and you should welcome it if it is played against you. You just need to know d5 and roughly the lines I just showed. You don't really need to know more. I myself don't know more, and always get a nice position. So what else is there? Here on the third move, of course, white has some other tries. He can, of course, just play this, which transposes into the 4 knights. This will be done in a later video. But another possibility here is g3. This is quite a decent line, actually. It's not played so often, but it's not a bad choice if the white player wants to avoid long theoretical lines. The idea is just to develop with bishop g2, knight to e2 or f3, castles, d3, and then maybe prepare f4 later. Black has two principled responses. He can go for a development sort of approach like this and set up the pieces in an harmonious way, just to show the general setup. This can always be played and should give black decent chances to equalize the game. The other move, which would be my main recommendation here, is to go d5, open up the center yourself, and this leads to something like this. Captures knight c6, and now white has a small choice here. He can go knight f3 or knight to e2. Knight to e2 would still leave the option of f4 open, but can be answered very nicely with bishop e6 to d4. This is something yeah, you should remember here in this position, because it simply leads to I think already an advantage for black. Well, I think I would at least clearly prefer black here. Maybe it's maybe equal, but well, what more can you hope for? You've got a nice development, great queen on d5, and white's king's position looks somewhat shaky in the long run. Knight f3 is much more common, also because this position often arises from a different move order. I just want to show this quickly. It can arise here from the 4 knights with g3, after which, oops, takes, leads to the same position. And this is actually the more common move order nowadays. Okay, let's go back to this move order, because I have the variation stored there. Here black also has a multitude of options. You can develop this bishop to any square, and it should be okay in any case, but my recommendation would be bishop e7 here. Castles, rook e1, and then bishop f6. The idea is to get some pressure on the d4 point and prevent white from advancing d4, opening up the center. This is just one approach. You can also put the bishop on d6 or c5 as mentioned, but I like this one to prevent d4. Rook b1, often played here to get some pressure on b7. Black, oops, this was the wrong button. Black should just cover this. Rook b8, and then maybe d3, bishop e6, c4, queen d7. Just a sample line. Black has easily completed his development, and maybe can think of playing a knight to d4 at a later stage, or first, of course, maybe exchanging the e6 against the g2 bishop. This exchange would be nice for black. In general, he has no bad pieces at all, and is nicely developed. So I think this should be around equal. Yeah, I think that's it for the Vienna and Bishops opening. This was actually much longer video than I expected, but well, I guess I also gave some interesting information here. I think mostly these lines can be handled without any deep theoretical knowledge of concrete lines. The only line which I would recommend to further study if you intend to play it is this here with c6, f4, and if you now want to go for one of the sharp lines with d5 or taking here, you should really maybe set up a board with an engine and sort of go through the lines a bit. I invested, I don't know, about half an hour and found some really nice but truly complicated lines that I don't want to show here. The video is already more than 40 minutes long, so this would have made the video even longer. Okay, this was the Vienna and Bishops opening. The next video, to introduce briefly, will deal with other offbeat tries on the second move, which is, if I now think about it, mostly d4 and some Gambit lines. I'm not sure what when I'm doing this. Maybe I don't have time tomorrow, but I will do this shortly. It won't be a week or so until the next video, and after this is done, I'll get to the more mainstream openings with knight f3 and knight c6, like the Scotch or the Italian game. Yeah, well, thanks for watching, and make sure to leave questions or comments on YouTube. See ya.